The harmattan breeze swept through the campus, carrying the dry, gritty scent of sand as it settled on their skin. The sun hung low in the November sky, its light dulled by the thick, dust-laden air. It was cold, but the day held a quiet intensity. As the keke napep sputtered to a stop, the driver turned back and nodded, already used to this routine of new students arriving on campus. The young woman stepped down gingerly, her eyes wide, taking in the newness of the surroundings. Her mother sighed, scanning her daughter up and down. Nne, come here. She motioned her over, and before the girl could protest, began adjusting her daughter's collar, brushing invisible dust from her blouse. Look, Chidera, this is your time, oh. You came here to read. I don't want any stories, eh? Make sure you attend morning mass every day. You hear me? And stay away from boys. Mommy, I know. Chidera muttered, her eyes fixed on the ground. Chidera dragged her feet toward the hostel, clutching the small receipt she had been given after the initial registration. All around her, freshers like herself were milling about, some nervously clutching their bags, others chatting excitedly with friends they'd arrived with. She stood alone, feeling the gnaw of unfamiliarity and loneliness. Unlike these girls, she didn't know anyone here. Her mother had mentioned how things used to be during her university days. Back then, in 1992, there were only two people per room, spacious enough for privacy and comfort. But now, 2013, it was a different reality. Four people cramped into one small space. How are we even going to breathe in there? She muttered under her breath, shaking her head as the line inched forward. Finally, it was her turn. The hostel official, looking somewhat bored and tired, gestured toward the clipboard in front of him. Next floor, room 207, he called out. Sign here. Chidera scribbled her name, her stomach sinking as she looked at the other three girls who were assigned the same room. She didn't know any of them, but they all seemed nice enough. Two of them were chatting excitedly, and the third was quietly adjusting her scarf. The smell of fresh paint and the chemicals hit her first, sharp and unpleasant, making her wrinkle her nose. Inside, the space was even smaller than she had imagined. Two sets of metal bunk beds took up most of the room, leaving just a narrow path between them. The walls were bare, the floor dull and uneven. It felt suffocating. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Four people in this tiny room? How would they even manage? Hi, came a voice breaking through her thoughts. One of the girls had already entered the room ahead of her, a cheerful smile on her face. She had dark braided hair and wore a simple t-shirt and jeans. You are in this room too? Chidera nodded, forcing a small smile. Yeah, I am. Nice to meet you. I'm Amaka, the girl said, extending her hand. Do you still have stuff downstairs? Yes, Chidera replied, her voice soft. My provisions and bags. I left them there. Amaka smiled warmly. No wahala. Let me help you bring them up. Chidera blinked, surprised by the offer. Oh, really? You don't have to. Nonsense. Amaka waved her off, already heading toward the door. We are roommates now, Abby. We help each other. Chidera felt a small warmth spread through her chest. She followed Amaka down the stairs, and together they hauled up the sacks of food, the kegs of oil, and the cartons of biscuits. Amaka didn't complain once, even joking about how her own mother had overloaded her with enough provisions to feed a small village. When they finally settled in the room, both girls sat on the edge of one of the lower bunks, catching their breath. So, what course are you offering? Amaka asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Mass communication, Chidera replied, still trying to absorb everything that had happened since she arrived. Amaka's eyes lit up. Ah, me too. Wow, that is great. We'll be seeing a lot of each other in class then. Chidera smiled, the unease she'd felt earlier slowly melting away. Yeah, looks like it. The room still felt small, the air still thick with the smell of paint, but suddenly it didn't seem so bad. She had a roommate who was kind, and maybe, just maybe, this experience wouldn't be as uncomfortable as she had feared. The room was dimly lit, save for the faint glow of Chidera'S phone screen as she quickly silenced her alarm at 4 a.m. She tiptoed across the small space, trying to gather her toiletries and towel without waking anyone. The hostel was eerily quiet, except for the occasional rustling of sheets from other rooms. She quickly had her bath and pushed her buckets under the bed where they belonged, but the metal clanged loudly against each other. Ah! Chidera, must you make all that noise? Chika's irritated voice cut through the stillness. She was lying in the top bunk, half awake, glaring down at her. Chidera cringed. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Keep it down next time, I beg, Chika muttered, rolling back over. Amaka, who was already awake and scrolling through her phone on the other bunk, glanced at Chika, clearly unimpressed. She sat up, her eyes narrowing. Is it that deep? She didn't wake you up on purpose. Chidera sighed, feeling embarrassed. I just woke up early to avoid the queues for the bathroom. I'm going to morning mass, she explained quietly, hoping to keep the peace. Amaka's face softened. Morning mass? Ah, I haven't been to mass in a while. Wait, I'll come with you. Chika groaned, clearly more annoyed now. Are you people serious? Amaka grinned mischievously as she reached under her bed, dragging her own bucket out noisily, making sure it scraped against the floor. The sound was loud, intentional, and clearly aimed at irritating Chika further. She pulled the bucket with more force, causing it to clang even louder than Chidera'S. Chika shot up in her bed, her expression furious. You people should have some sense now. It's too early for this nonsense. Amaka just laughed, unbothered, while Chidera bit her lip, trying to suppress her own smile. Sandra, their other roommate, remained fast asleep on her bed, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. Amaka shrugged. It's not that serious, Chika. Go back to bed, Joe. Chika hissed loudly, muttering something under her breath as she yanked her blanket over her head. Amaka and Chidera exchanged amused glances and quietly giggled. Let me go and bath quickly, Amaka said, grabbing her towel and heading out to the shared bathroom. Chidera sat on her bed, waiting, pressing her phone to pass the time. The hostel was still mostly silent, the usual bustle of morning preparations yet to begin. She scrolled through her messages, trying to ignore the rising heat she felt after everything that had just happened. Moments later, Amaka returned, her towel wrapped loosely around her body. Still slightly damp, she carried her bucket back into the room and shoved it under her bed, making a bit more noise than necessary as she did. Chidera glanced up briefly, but quickly looked away when she caught a glimpse of Amaka wiping her body with the towel, revealing some skin than she expected. Heat flushed through Chidera, her heart thudding a little faster. She immediately shifted her gaze back to her phone, feeling flustered. What was that? She mentally chastised herself, trying to calm down. Amaka seemed unaware, casually patting herself dry before slipping into her clothes. I think from mass we'll head straight to class, she said, pulling on her shirt. Chidera nodded, grateful for the distraction. Yeah, that's a good idea. Amaka finished getting dressed, and they both grabbed their bags, quietly slipping out of the room. The corridor was cool and still as they made their way to the chapel. Chidera couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and unease. Something had shifted within her, and she wasn't sure how to make sense of it yet. But for now, she pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the cool morning air and the day ahead. Amaka, always beside her, was focused during Mass, her lips moving silently as she prayed. Chidera tried to focus too, but sometimes her thoughts wandered. It wasn't just the sermon or the prayers that occupied her mind now. After Mass, they headed straight to class, joining the growing crowd of students in the lecture hall. Amaka was always prepared, her pen moving swiftly across the page as the lecturer spoke about media ethics and communication models. Chidera, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, her handwriting becoming messier as she tried to jot everything down, but soon she realized she was missing key points. Amaka, very sharp, noticed. Do you want me to help with this part? She asked quietly, leaning over. Chidera nodded gratefully. I'm not getting all of it. Amaka smiled and explained, her voice calm and sure, her hand tracing over the notes to make things clearer. But as she spoke, her hand grazed Chidera'S arm, light, almost imperceptible, but the touch sent a shiver down Chidera'S spine. She stiffened, trying to focus on the explanation, but her mind was elsewhere. This feeling was new, confusing. Her mother had always warned her about boys. Don't let them touch you anyhow, her mother would say. Focus on your studies, stay away from trouble. But she had never mentioned girls. What was this? Chidera brushed it off at first, convincing herself it was just the stress of school, but the feeling lingered. Amaka was smart, helpful, kind, but it was more than that. Her presence was starting to affect Chidera in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Weeks passed, and Chidera found herself sitting with Amaka in every class. She relied on her for notes, for help understanding difficult topics, but also for companionship. There was a sense of comfort and warmth when Amaka was near, but now it came with an edge of nervousness that Chidera couldn't shake. One afternoon, after a long class, Chidera returned to her dorm to catch up on some much needed sleep. She had just spread her freshly washed clothes outside to dry and lay down when exhaustion took over. A few hours later, she woke up to find that her clothes had been crumpled, pushed to the side on the drying line. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped outside and saw Chika calmly pinning her own clothes to the line. Chidera marched over, her anger rising. "Why did you squeeze my clothes like this?" she demanded, her voice tense. Chika barely looked up. "There wasn't enough space. I needed to dry my clothes too," she replied, nonchalant, as though it was no big deal. Chidera's frustration boiled over. "You could have asked me. Look at how you treated my clothes." She fumed, her hands trembling as she pointed to the now wrinkled clothes on the line. Chika rolled her eyes. "It's not that serious. They are still dry, aren't they?" "Don't touch my things without asking me again," Chidera snapped, her voice rising. Amaka, hearing the commotion, walked into the courtyard, her eyes flicked between Chidera and Chika, quickly piecing together what had happened. Without a word, Amaka strode over to the line, grabbed Chika's freshly washed clothes, and threw them on the ground. Chika spun around, furious. "Are you mad? Why would you do that?" Amaka's eyes were cold as she stepped forward. "If you don't respect Chidera'S things, don't expect anyone to respect yours." Chika's face twisted with anger, and in a flash, she lunged at Amaka, grabbing her by the shirt. "How dare you!" Amaka didn't hesitate. She shoved Chika back hard, causing her to stumble. "Touch me again, and I'll show you madness." Amaka growled, her voice low and dangerous. Chika wasn't backing down. "You think you can intimidate me? Try it." She pushed Amaka again, harder this time, and the two girls clashed, hands flying as they grabbed and shoved each other. Chidera, watching in shock, rushed forward. "Stop! Stop it, both of you!" she shouted, trying to wedge herself between them. Amaka had her fist clenched, ready to swing, but Chidera stepped in, pushing them apart. "Enough!" Chidera's voice was sharp, commanding, and for a moment both Amaka and Chika paused, breathing heavily, their anger simmering just beneath the surface. Amaka's chest was heaving, her eyes still locked on Chika, but she slowly stepped back. "Don't try that nonsense again, Chika," she warned. "If you do, I'll deal with you." Chika, still furious, glared at both of them before bending down to pick up her clothes from the dirt. She huffed, storming off without another word. Chidera turned to Amaka, her heart still racing. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, though a part of her was secretly relieved. Amaka shrugged, her expression softening. "She was disrespecting you. I couldn't let that slide." Chidera swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. She felt grateful but also unsettled by how fiercely protective Amaka had been. "Let's just forget about it," Chidera said, trying to ease the tension. But the way Amaka had looked at her, fierce, loyal, and something else entirely, stayed with her long after the fight had ended. The sun beat down lazily on the campus grounds as Chidera and Amaka packed up their bags after class. The day had been long, and Chidera was ready to crash, but Amaka had other plans. "I need to buy some clothes," Amaka said, standing up and stretching. Chidera, without hesitation, nodded. "I'll come with you." They walked to the main road and hailed a keke napep. Amaka, as usual, was talking. Can you believe that lecturer today? He acts like he's allergic to common sense. Chidera laughed. True, the way he talks as if we are all toddlers. Amaka leaned in, lowering her voice to mimic their lecturer's tone. Students, please maintain decorum. Even though I forgot your test results for 2 weeks, you must remain patient and respectful. Her impression was so spot on. Shiraya couldn't hold back her laughter. She laughed so hard that she felt a sudden drip at her nose. Oh no! She froze, realizing that her laughter had caused Kata to slip down, visible for anyone to see. Panic gripped her as she fumbled to find a handkerchief, which she didn't have. Amaka noticed. She turned slowly, eyes softening in a way that made Chidera'S heart race. Don't worry, Amaka murmured, leaning closer, her light citrus perfume washing over Chidera in waves. With the smallest of movements, Amaka reached out and wiped the catarrh from Chidera'S nose with her thumb. The touch was gentle, but it sent a shock through Chidera's system. She felt the warmth of Amaka's skin against hers and held her breath, trying to remain composed. They weren't alone in the keke after all. Thank you, Chidera mumbled, her cheeks flushed, eyes now fixed on anything but Amaka. No problem, Amaka replied, her tone casual, but the smile playing on her lips didn't go unnoticed. Soon they arrived at the market, the noise of traders shouting their goods immediately filling the air. Chiffon tops, 50 naira. Get your chiffon tops here, 50, 50, 50, 50. Chidera snorted, her lips curling into a playful grin. You are not serious, Amaka. Don't tell me you actually buy from these roadside sellers. Amaka raised an eyebrow, undeterred. My dear, let me school you. You think these boutique people don't come here to buy? They'll just wash and iron these same clothes, slap a price tag of 300,000 and sell it to people who don't know better. Chidera laughed, shaking her head. You are wicked. Look at you, Amaka teased, bending down to inspect a pile of colorful tops. It's all the same game. Why should I pay boutique prices when I can buy here and still slay? The two girls laughed together, their voices blending with the cacophony of the market. They sifted through the tops, picking out a few items, laughing and chatting as they went. It was a good day, easy and fun. Just as they were wrapping up, a loud honk startled them. Chidera looked up, just in time to see a sleek black jeep speeding by, splashing dirty water all over Amaka's dress. The sudden impact jerked Amaka backward, her hands flying up as the dirty water stained her dress beyond recognition. Jesus Christ! Amaka gasped, her voice low and tense as she stared down at the mess. Chidra's immediate reaction was fury. Her chest tightened as her eyes snapped toward the jeep. The driver slowed down and parked at the side of the road, rolling down his window. A young man, no older than 35, leaned out, looking flustered. I'm so sorry, he called out, already stepping out of the car. It was an accident. I didn't see the puddle until it was too late. Chidera felt her fist clench. Accident? She was livid. She took a step forward, glaring at the man. Do you know what you've just done? Look at her dress. The man rushed over, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I really am sorry. I swear I didn't mean it. Amaka, on the other hand, stood there, her gaze fixed on her ruined dress. She wasn't saying anything, but her eyes held a cold anger. The man, Mr. Ike, as they'd later find out, fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. Let me at least pay for your clothes, he said, turning to the trader. How much for these items? The trader replied smoothly, 250 naira. 250? The man looked shocked. You are buying clothes for 215 naira. Amaka's head snapped up, her lips curling into a sharp scoff. Ha! So because you drive a jeep, you think everyone should be spending big like you, right? Chidera, her anger flaring again, chimed in. Imagine, he thinks 250 is too small for us. You think we can't manage ourselves, huh? Just because you have money. The man, clearly overwhelmed by their fiery responses, tried to explain. No, no, that's not what I meant. You just have no sense, Amaka interrupted, her voice cold as ice. Keep your money to yourself, we don't need it. By now, a small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold. Mr. Ike, still holding out the money, seemed unsure of what to do. Please, let me just pay, he repeated, his voice desperate. Chidera shook her head firmly, her anger still burning hot. "We don't want your money. Just leave us alone." He hesitated, but the resolve in their eyes made it clear they weren't backing down. With a weak smile, he pocketed the cash. "I'm really sorry," he mumbled one last time before retreating to his jeep. As soon as he was out of sight, Chidera and Amaka exchanged glances and then they burst into laughter. "Can you imagine?" Chidera said between fits of laughter. Amaka shook her head, still chuckling. "Some people sha." They paid the 250 naira for their clothes and headed deeper into the market, still giggling over the absurdity of the encounter. Chidera could feel the tension from earlier melting away, replaced with a lightness that only Amaka seemed to bring out in her. Each day had its routine. Chidera and Amaka would wake up at dawn, shuffle to the bathroom to get ready, grab a quick breakfast at the campus cafeteria and head off to class, always chatting about their lecturers or what they do after school. Today, however, was different. The morning had slipped through their fingers, and when Chidera's eyes finally fluttered open, she saw the clock on her phone glaring back at her. 7:45 a.m. "Oh no, I should have set my alarm," Chidera exclaimed, throwing her blanket aside, panic evident in her voice. Amaka, always the calmer one, smiled sleepily. "Don't blame yourself, it happens. We are late, but it's not the end of the world." "It's 7:45 already," Chidera groaned. "Once it's 8 a.m., that wicked lecturer shuts the door, and if he gives a pop quiz today..." Chidera trailed off, looking genuinely worried, her heart racing at the thought of missing the class. Amaka, noticing her tension, quickly slid out of bed, thinking of ways to ease her friend's anxiety. "We'll figure it out," Amaka said, putting her hand on Chidera's shoulder. "Don't worry." The two of them rushed to the shared bathroom, only to be greeted by a long line of girls already waiting their turn. Chidera's heart sank. "This is bad," Chidera muttered, biting her lip. Amaka glanced at the clock again. 7:48 a.m. She stepped forward, her voice polite yet firm as she addressed the girls ahead of them. "Please, can you allow us to go in next? We know you got here first, but we are late for lectures and we really need to hurry." Chidera stood by, hopeful yet nervous, as the other girls glanced at each other and then nodded. "No problem, you can go next," one of them said. Chidera's face lit up with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." When the next girl stepped out of the store, Amaka wasted no time. "Let's just go together. We'll be quick." They entered the stall and closed the door behind them. The small space instantly steamy from the heat. Amaka began to pour water from her bucket and Chidera quickly shared her towel, fumbling to bathe as fast as possible. But as soon as Chidera dropped the towel, Amaka froze. Her eyes lingered on Chidera just for a second too long. "You look really beautiful," Amaka said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Chidera's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment the world outside the tiny store disappeared. She blinked, unsure of what to say, her mind swirling with confusion and curiosity. "Can I touch?" Amaka asked again, her tone bolder this time, though she kept her voice low. "Stay calm so they don't know what's going on." Chidera swallowed hard, nodding without really thinking. Amaka's fingers grazed her skin, soft and deliberate, and Chidera struggled to remain still, her body tense, her heart racing. The moment stretched between them, intimate and charged, but the sound of chatter outside kept them anchored to reality. "There's no time," Amaka whispered suddenly, pulling back as she began pouring water over herself again. "We need to hurry." The tension eased and both girls bathed in silence, quickly rinsing off the soap with the water from their buckets. They stepped out of the store together, trying to mask the lingering electricity between them with casual smiles. No one seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. The other girls continued their routine, none the wiser. Chidera and Amaka rushed back to the hostel immediately after class. Their pace quickened as they glanced at the time. They knew Sandra wouldn't be back from her nursing posting for a while, and Chika had her own lectures. This was their only window of privacy. As soon as they got inside, Chidera closed the door behind them, locking it swiftly. Amaka smiled at her, the kind of smile that made Chidera'S heart flutter. They fell into each other's arms, embracing tightly, as if the weight of the world disappeared in those stolen moments. This was their routine every day. They found a way to be together like this, in secret, away from prying eyes. But that day, as they lay in each other's arms, the door suddenly flung open with a loud creak. Chika stood frozen in the doorway, her face twisting in shock and disgust. "What the hell?" she screamed, her voice piercing through the room. Chidera leaped up, fear seizing her. Amaka, on the other hand, remained calm, her face expressionless as she stared at Chika. Within moments, the hostel was in chaos. Some girls rushed to the scene, drawn by Chika's scream. The room was quickly packed with horrified hostel mates, their eyes wide in disbelief as Chika narrated what she had walked into. "Bundle them," one of the girls shouted. "Take them to the matron." The next few minutes were a blur as hands grabbed at both Chidera and Amaka, dragging them through the hostel corridors. The whispers and murmurs followed them like a wave. "Lesbians," someone shouted from behind. Chidera's heart pounded in her chest, shame and fear colliding in her mind. "It's not anyone's business what they do with each other," another said, but she was quickly cut short. "Not inside the hostel. They can go to their homes and be doing such." When they were finally brought before the matron, a wave of silence swept over the crowd. The matron, an older woman with a stern face but tired eyes, raised her hand to calm the students. "Everyone calm down," the matron ordered. "I will handle this matter personally. Please return to your rooms." But Chika wasn't having it. She stepped forward, her face contorted in anger. "No, I won't calm down," she spat, glaring at Amaka and Chidera. "So this is why you two were always covering for each other in the room, always protecting each other's backs, right?" Chika sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's because of this disgusting thing. You even pushed my clothes off the floor once because of her." Amaka met Chika's gaze, unfazed, but Chidera was trembling, tears already filling her eyes. She could hear her mother's voice in her head, warning her to stay away from boys, to focus on her studies. How could she ever explain this? "If I don't take this case to the authorities," Chika continued, raising her hand in a dramatic oath, "then call me a bastard. Mark my words, the two of you will be expelled for this. My name is not Chika or Diego if I don't see that justice is served." Chidera's sobs grew louder. She couldn't bear the thought of her mother hearing about this, let alone the disgrace it would bring to her family. Amaka, however, remained calm, her expression almost serene. Soon, they were marched to the Student Affairs Office, where they were handed over to security officials for questioning. Chidera barely heard the questions as they made their statements. Her mind was spinning. How had things spiraled so quickly? The next day, they were called to face the disciplinary panel. Chika, who was the star witness, wasted no time in recounting her version of events, exaggerating every detail. "I walked in and found them," she said, her voice dramatic, "in each other's arms, doing things no girl should be doing with another." She emphasized certain points, twisting the narrative to make it even worse. Other girls from the hostel were called in to give their accounts. "They always bathed together," one of them said, even though it had only happened once. Each testimony seemed to add more weight to their doom. Finally, the panel concluded and the girls were told to call their parents. Chidera's mother came all the way from Oka when she got the call, but she still didn't know the full extent of the situation. Amaka's mother, too, had arrived, her face stern but unreadable. When everyone was seated and the vice chancellor explained what had happened, Chidera's mother broke down instantly. "My, my enemies have succeeded," she wailed, falling to her knees, beating her chest in agony. "This is not the daughter I raised. Oh God, why have you allowed him to come upon me?" Chidera couldn't even look at her. The weight of her mother's words crushed her. How did things end up like this? The vice chancellor cleared his throat, preparing to pronounce the verdict when suddenly the door of the office swung open. A tall figure stepped inside. Chidera's heart stopped. It was Mr. Ike, the man from the market. He strode forward confidently, his face calm but his presence commanding the room. "Excuse me, sir," he addressed the vice chancellor, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I believe I can shed some light on this situation." All eyes turned to him, the air in the room. The tension in the room was suffocating. Mr. Ike stood tall, his face unreadable, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. The vice chancellor cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. A quiet murmur broke the silence as a university official approached Mr. Ike, whispering something in his ear. Mr. Ike nodded slightly, and within moments, the panel was adjourned for a break. Chidera'S heart was racing, her palms sweaty as she watched Mr. Ike step outside with the vice chancellor. The doors closed behind them, leaving a room full of whispers and unanswered questions. Outside, Mr. Ike and the VC stood in the corridor, the atmosphere thick with tension. The VC looked nervous, his voice low as he spoke. Mr. Ike, you know we have a reputation to uphold. This situation is complicated. Mr. Ike raised a brow, his tone calm but firm. Complicated, perhaps, but it can also be managed. My father practically built this school, you know that. And if you handle this situation with care, I'm certain he'd be willing to extend even more goodwill to the university. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. The vice chancellor hesitated, glancing down at the floor. He knew what Mr. Ike was implying. A suspension, perhaps, but they can no longer stay in the hostels. That's non-negotiable. Mr. Ike gave a small approving nod. A fair compromise. Moments later, they returned to the room, the air even more charged than before. Chidera could barely breathe, her chest tight with anxiety. The vice chancellor sat down as he whispered with the other stakeholders. He cleared his throat once more and addressed the room. After careful consideration and discussion with the stakeholders, it has been decided that Chidera and Amaka will be suspended from the university for 2 weeks. During this time, and when they return, they are to vacate the school premises and are no longer permitted to live within the hostels. Chidera's stomach dropped. 2 weeks felt like a slap on the wrist compared to what she had been expecting. But the weight of leaving the hostel, leaving Amaka, felt far heavier. She glanced at Amaka, but neither said a word. Their mothers, however, exchanged looks. After the hearing, the girls returned to the hostel to pack their belongings, their mothers trailing behind. Chidera's mother was still wailing as they entered the room, collapsing onto the nearest bed. Her cries filled the room, thick with the same phrase on repeat. My daughter is not like this. My daughter isn't like this. She sobbed, holding her head in her hands. Amaka's mother, on the other hand, stood quietly, her face worn and tired. She sighed deeply, the exhaustion of it all settling into her bones. Chidera'S mother shot her a glare. Your daughter must have influenced my daughter, she spat, her voice sharp, the bitterness palpable. She couldn't even look Amaka's mother in the eyes, her anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Amaka's mother said nothing, her silence louder than any retort. She simply shook her head, her eyes reflecting years of disappointment, not just with Amaka, but with the world around her. She knew that no words would change the outcome now. Amaka focused on packing, her movements deliberate, her face expressionless. But just as she was folding the last of her clothes, she stopped abruptly. I need to pee, she muttered, walking quickly out of the room. As soon as she left, the silence in the room was thick. Chidera continued packing her things, her mother's quiet sobs the only sound in the room. She folded her clothes with shaky hands, trying to keep her mind from spiraling further. But then, Amaka's phone buzzed on the bed, lighting up with a message. Chidera instinctively glanced toward it, and what she saw made her stomach flip. Mr. Ike. His name was there, plain as day. A recent message from him appeared on the screen. You are welcome. Chidera blinked, her heart racing. Why does Amaka have Mr. Ike's contact? She sat frozen, her mind racing. Why had Amaka been in contact with him? And for how long? The question swelled in her head. The room suddenly feeling too small, too suffocating. She didn't know how to process this new revelation. 2 days later, she lay in her bed at home, the tears still coming. Her head ached from crying so much. Her eyes puffy and sore. Yesterday, her mother had called a family meeting to discuss what had happened. Relatives had come to judge, to gossip, and to remind her of the shame she had brought upon the family. It had been unbearable, and through it all, her mind kept circling back to Amaka. How long had she been talking to Mr. Ike? Why didn't she tell me? The betrayal burned deep, twisting her heart in ways she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed again, just as it had been for days now. Amaka was trying to reach her, sending message after message. You are hurting me. Please speak up. Are you okay? Another message came in, followed by another missed call. Chidera looked at the phone, her breath shaky. She stared at the screen, her heart conflicted, unsure of what to do next. Should she answer? Should she confront Amaka? Or should she just let it go? The screen blinked again. Amaka calling. Chidera stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, her finger hovering over the green button. Her heart raced, and the knot in her stomach tightened. She didn't want to pick up, but she also couldn't ignore Amaka any longer. She pressed answer and held the phone to her ear. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence hung heavy between them, the weight of their unspoken words pressing down on Chidera'S chest. She could hear Amaka breathing on the other end, the familiar sound, both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Finally, Amaka broke the silence, her voice soft and trembling. What's wrong, Chidera? You know it really hurts me when we are like this. Her voice cracked just slightly, and Chidera felt her heart ache. She wasn't used to hearing Amaka sound vulnerable. Chidera swallowed hard, her voice shaky when she finally spoke. You've been speaking with Mr. Ike. For how long? Amaka sighed on the other end, the sound deep and exasperated. Is that it? Chidera, you could have just asked me about it before getting so angry. There was a brief pause before Amaka continued, her voice steadier now. We met in school a few weeks after the market incident. We are just friends, nothing more. You know I'm not into men. Why are you getting mad over this? Chidera felt her chest tighten, the words stumbling out of her mouth before she could stop them. Because I don't know why. Why didn't you tell me you met him again after the market? The line went quiet for a moment, and when Amaka spoke again, her voice was softer, almost apologetic. I didn't think it was that serious. Besides, we only talk on phone. I've never been to his house. Chidera's heart sank at those words. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what she had just heard. So he's been asking you to come to his place, she thought, her mind racing with insecurities. So he's been asking you to come to his place, she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Amaka sighed, frustration creeping into her tone now. Chidera, stop it. You are letting your insecurities get the better of you. He is a man. I'm not attracted to him. Is this what we are going to be doing now? Doubting each other? Chidera closed her eyes, feeling the tears start to well up again. She hated this. She hated feeling so unsure, so confused about everything. It's fine. I've heard you, she said, her voice hollow. I just, I just need to sleep. We'll talk later. Amaka sighed on the other end, clearly not satisfied with how the conversation was going. I'll call you tomorrow. We can hang out, maybe. I can come to your area and we'll talk properly. Chidera shook her head. even though she knew Amaka couldn't see her. "I'd rather we don't," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her words. She took a deep breath, knowing what she had to say next, but dreading it all the same. Maybe, maybe we should stop, take a break and analyze what we have for each other. The silence on the other end was deafening. Chidera could hear her own heartbeats in her ears as she waited for Amaka's response, but none came. For a few moments, Amaka said nothing, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. Then, in a move that Chidera wasn't expecting, Amaka just ended the call. The line went dead. Chidera stared at her phone, disbelief flooding her system. And then, like a dam breaking, the tears came. She collapsed onto her bed, her body shaking with sobs, the sound of her cry echoing through the empty room. The love she felt for Amaka felt like a weight on her chest now, heavy and suffocating. She hated that she loved her this much. She hated that Amaka had such a hold on her heart. But most of all, she hated that she couldn't just stop feeling this way, no matter how hard she tried. Tears soaked her pillow, and she cried until her body ached, her heart breaking over and over with each thought of Amaka. The days passed by in a blur, and before long, Chidera'S suspension was over. Her mother, still deeply concerned, would have preferred Chidera not returning to the university. But she knew her options were limited. Transferring schools was a complicated process, and despite her reservations, Chidera'S mother felt that she had done her part in warning her daughter, hoping her words would sink in. She had also reached out to Madame Caro, a devout friend from their Christian women's group, who lived close to the campus. Madame Caro had agreed to take Chidera in and keep an eye on her, ensuring she didn't cross paths with Amaka again. It was the best arrangement Chidera'S mother could make in the situation. Meanwhile, Amaka's life had also shifted. Her older brother, ever supportive, had paid for her to stay in a lodge near the campus. She was happy. It wasn't as restrictive as staying in the hostel, and it gave her some space and freedom. Despite being in the same university, Chidera and Amaka had avoided each other like the plague. They no longer sat together in class or exchanged words. Since Amaka had abruptly ended the call after their last conversation, they had acted like strangers. It was almost as if they had never been a part of each other's lives. A few days after their suspension had ended, Chidera was walking alone through the campus grounds when she saw her, Amaka. The sight of her made Chidera's heart stop. Butterflies erupted in her stomach, and her pulse quickened. But she kept her face emotionless, her gaze fixed ahead. Amaka was walking alone too, her eyes straight ahead, showing no sign of acknowledging Chidera's presence. For a moment, it felt like they were worlds apart. But as they passed each other, something happened that neither of them expected. They both turned around at the exact same moment. Their eyes met, briefly, but it was enough. Chidera's heart pounded even harder. It was like a jolt in her system, the familiar rush of emotions flooding back all at once. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and yet she couldn't look away. But then, just as quickly as their eyes met, they both turned back around, their movements awkward and tense. Chidera's chest ached. Why did she turn? Why did I turn? The encounter left her reeling, her emotions a tangled mess. She hadn't expected Amaka to be so agreeable to the breakup when she had suggested the break. Part of her had wanted Amaka to fight for her, to prove that their connection was real. But now, she didn't know what to feel or how to approach her. In class the next day, Chidera found herself glancing at Amaka again. She couldn't help it. Amaka was still the same, focused, fast at taking down notes, seemingly unbothered. But something had changed. Amaka wasn't alone anymore. She had made a new friend, Susan. Chidera's stomach twisted as she watched them. Susan didn't seem to care about the whispers and the lesbianism tag that had stuck to both Amaka and Chidera since their incidents. Most of the students kept their distance, only speaking to them when absolutely necessary. But Susan didn't seem fazed by any of it. In fact, Susan and Amaka seemed to be getting along quite well, too well, in Chidera'S opinion. They laughed together, exchanged notes, and whispered during lectures. Chidera'S heart sank further, especially when she noticed Susan's hand grazing Amaka's arm during one of their conversations. It was casual, subtle, but Chidera caught it, and it hurt. That same day, on her way out of campus, Chidera ran into Chika. She was standing with Sandra and a few of her other friends. As soon as they saw Chidera, the group, except Sandra, erupted into laughter. Chika was the loudest, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Is she the one? One of the girls asked, her tone mocking. Yes, she's the one, Chika answered, a smirk playing on her lips. You really treated her, oh, the girl replied, laughing even harder. Chika's smile grew wider. Next time, they'll know not to joke with me. Imagine liking a fellow woman like you. Disgraceful. Their voices grew fainter as Chidera quickened her pace, her heart sinking lower with every word. By the time she reached the campus gates and boarded a keke napep to take her to Madame Caro's place, her eyes were already stinging with tears. As soon as she arrived at Madame Caro's, she rushed to the small visitor's room where she was staying. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free. She collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. I can't take this anymore. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts, her heart aching with every picture and message from Amaka she came across. The memories were too painful, too fresh. With shaking hands, she began deleting everything. Amaka's contacts, their photos, the messages they had exchanged. It felt like cutting a piece of her heart out, but she knew she had to do it. Things had started to look up for Chidera after she made the difficult decision to delete Amaka's contacts and pictures. Without those constant reminders, it became easier for her to focus on herself and her studies. She no longer spent her nights staring at Amaka's photos, daydreaming about what could have been, or wrestling with the urge to call her whenever the loneliness hit. There was simply no way to reach out anymore. And though the emptiness still lingered, there was a sense of closure. She missed Amaka, of course. How could she not? But with each passing day, the pain dulled and life continued. Amaka, too, seemed to have moved on. Just the other day, Chidera had spotted her in Mr. Ike's car, Susan sitting behind them. The sight had sent a familiar pang of jealousy through her chest, but she quickly pushed it down. Let her go, she told herself. Focus on your studies. Maybe it's time to move on. Maybe make some male friends. She had even entertained the idea of getting intimate with a man, wondering if that was what she needed to quiet the confusion inside her. Amaka had once told her that she had discovered her sexuality back in secondary school and had already been with two other girls before her, as well as a man. She had the experience. I don't have any experience, Chidera thought to herself often, the feeling of inadequacy creeping in. This internal conflict continued throughout the year. and it seemed as though both of them had successfully moved on. At least, that was until one fateful day. It was a Saturday evening around 7 p.m. Chidera had spent the day at the campus library, studying for the upcoming faculty exams set to begin on Monday. Exhausted from a long day of cramming, she had gathered her things and was preparing to leave. Madame Caro had already called her several times, urging her to come home before it got too late. She boarded a keke napep, settling into the back seat with a sigh of relief, her body drained from studying. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling, not paying much attention to her surroundings. The keke had barely gone a few meters when it stopped again to pick up another passenger by the roadside. Chidera, engrossed in her phone, didn't bother looking up. But the moment the passenger sat down, she froze. The familiar scent of citrus filled the air, and before she could turn her head, she knew who it was. Slowly, she glanced to her side, and her heart skipped a beat. It was Amaka. Their eyes locked immediately, and the atmosphere in the keke changed. The air felt charged, like there was electricity buzzing between them. Chidera's chest tightened, her fingers trembling as she quickly shoved her phone back into her bag. She looked straight ahead, trying to calm the sudden rush of emotions, but her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. For a few moments, they sat there in silence. The tension was thick, and Chidera could feel Amaka's presence like a magnet pulling her in. Her mind raced, but she didn't know what to say, or if she even wanted to say anything. And then, out of nowhere, Amaka's hand lightly touched hers. Chidera froze, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't move, didn't say a word. She just sat there, feeling the warmth of Amaka's hand on hers. Amaka gently squeezed her hand, and before Chidera could react, she leaned in close, her breath warm against Chidera's ear. "I've missed you," she whispered, her voice soft, but the words were heavy with emotion. Just then, the keke came to a stop. They had reached Amaka's place. Amaka stepped out and paid the driver, her eyes lingering on Chidera for a brief moment. The driver was about to continue on his route when suddenly Chidera blurted out, "Driver, I'm stopping here." The driver, confused, turned back to look at her. "We have not reached Silicon Hill, madam," he said, a bit annoyed. Chidera sighed, her heart racing. "I know," she replied, reaching into her bag to pay him the fare. The driver shrugged, took the money and drove off, leaving the two women standing alone in the night. They stood in silence for a moment, the street lamp casting long shadows on the ground. Chidera's heart pounded in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, but she didn't have time to process any of it. Without another word, they leaned into each other, their lips meeting in a soft, lingering kiss. It felt like a release, a culmination of all the emotions they had been holding back for so long. The kiss was tender, filled with a sense of longing, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Neither of them said anything as they made their way into Amaka's house. The door closed behind them, and before they knew it, they were falling into each other's arms, the tension between them dissolving into something deeper, something familiar, yet overwhelming. The next morning, the air between them was quieter. Chidera watched as Amaka stood at the stove, preparing Indomie noodles, the scent filling the small kitchen. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there, like everything else they were too afraid to say. I'm not sleeping with Susan or Mr. Ike, Amaka said suddenly, her voice calm but firm as she dished out some of the noodles onto a plate and pushed it toward Chidera. The statement caught Chidera off guard, and for a moment, she froze, avoiding Amaka's gaze. I didn't say you were, Chidera mumbled, her voice quieter than usual. She picked at the noodles, but didn't take a bite. Amaka sighed, steadying the pot on the counter and dragging the bench closer. She sat down, eating directly from the pot. Chidera, I don't know what you think of me, but whether you believe me or not, I'm in love with only you. Chidera let out a long sigh, the tension in her body still palpable. It's hard to believe that when you keep hanging out with other people. Amaka narrowed her eyes, but instead of pushing the argument further, she changed the subject. Does your auntie know where you slept last night? The words hit Chidera like a slap. Oh no. In the heat of passion with Amaka, she had switched off her phone to avoid disturbance. Her eyes widened in realization. Ewo, she'll kill me. Chidera jumped up, rushing to the bedside table to grab her phone. She fumbled with the device, switching it on. The screen blinked to life, revealing a flood of missed calls. 33 from her mother, 3 from Madame Caro, along with several frantic messages. Chidera's heart sank as guilt washed over her. I have to go, Chidera said quickly, shoving her phone into her bag. It's Sunday. I missed church, and tomorrow is exams. She abandoned the plate of Indomie, her mind already racing with excuses she would need to make. Just as Chidera reached the door, Amaka called after her. Chidera. She paused, turning back. See you around? Amaka asked, her tone casual but laced with a hint of hope. Chidera smiled, albeit weakly. Yeah, see you. Then she slipped out the door. The next few weeks went by in a blur. Exams came and went, and Chidera, despite the tension in her personal life, managed to do well. Madame Caro and her mother had both been livid when she returned to Madame Caro's house that Sunday. But Chidera had given the excuse that she'd stayed at another hostel for a study session. Chidera and Amaka acted like strangers on campus. They passed each other without a word, keeping their distance. But behind closed doors, things were different. Their secret meetings in Amaka's lodge became the only solace they had. Their affair continued in secret, hidden from the prying eyes of students who had long since labeled them. By the time they entered their final year, it had become a routine. One day, while lounging in Amaka's room after another hidden meeting, Chidera finally found the courage to ask, So, what's up with you and Mr. Ike? Amaka, lying on her back and staring at the ceiling, grinned mischievously. He likes me. He's even told me he'd marry me. The words hit Chidera like a punch in the gut. Her brow furrowed. So you marry him? Amaka laughed, waving her hand dismissively. Maybe, but it doesn't mean anything. He knows who I am. I know who he is. A chronic womanizer. We could marry each other to satisfy society, while we both have our separate partners outside. Chidera's jaw dropped. And you believe him? Amaka chuckled again. Yes, of course. He's really nice and funny when you get to know him. Chidera nodded slowly, but her heart felt heavy. She didn't like the idea one bit. It had been a few months since graduation, and both Chidera and Amaka were struggling to adjust to life after university. Jobs were scarce, and the pressure of entering the real world weighed heavily on them. Chidera had spent more time at home, taking care of her mother, whose health was deteriorating due to liver disease. Her father had died a long time ago when she was barely 5 years old. The weight of her responsibilities to her mother grew heavier with each passing day. One evening, Amaka asked Chidera to meet her at a small restaurant they used to frequent during their university days. Chidera agreed, thinking it was just a chance to catch up, maybe reminisce about simpler times. As she entered the restaurant, the warm light inside cast a nostalgic glow on the familiar space, bringing back memories of stolen glances and shared laughter. Amaka was already seated at a corner table, her eyes lighting up as soon as she saw Chidera approach. They exchanged a brief smile, though there was an underlying tension in the air, something unsaid lingering between them. They ordered their usual meals, but the conversation was tilted. Chidera could feel the shift, but she couldn't put a finger on what it was. She wasn't prepared for what Amaka said next. "Marry me," Amaka blurted out suddenly, her eyes locking onto Chidera'S with a mix of hope and fear. "Let's leave here. Go somewhere we can be free to love each other." Chidera blinked, stunned. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Amaka leaned forward, her hands reaching across the table to take Chidera'S. "Let's leave. We can go to a place where people like us don't have to hide. Somewhere we can build a life together. I've done the research. We could get married and live without fear, without judgment." Chidera pulled her hands back slowly, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this. "I thought you said you'd marry Mr. Ike and continue living your secret life. I'd prefer that." Amaka's brow furrowed in confusion. "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Chidera looked down at her hands, her mind racing. "My mother is ill, Amaka. You don't expect me to abandon her and follow you. But you can stay back and marry Mr. Ike, and we can still be together, like before." Amaka's eyes widened, and for the first time, her confidence wavered. "I was wrong, Chidera. I don't want to marry Mr. Ike. Yes, I know he'd propose in a heartbeat, but that's not what I want. I don't want to live a secret life anymore. I want to be free to love you, out in the open." Chidera swallowed hard, the weight of the situation settling on her chest like a boulder. She could feel Amaka's sincerity, but the idea of leaving everything behind, her mother, her home, her sense of duty, felt impossible. "So what are you saying?" Chidera asked, her voice breaking. "Are you asking me to choose between you and my mother?" Amaka leaned forward, her eyes softening. "No, I am not asking you to choose. Your mother can come join us after a few months. We will make it work. This is our chance, Chidera. A golden opportunity for us to be happy." Chidera shook her head, her frustration growing. "It's a golden opportunity for you, not for me, Amaka. My place is here. My mother is sick. I can't just leave her behind." Amaka's face fell, and for the first time, the hope in her eyes dimmed. She sat back in her chair, staring at Chidera as if seeing her for the first time. I thought you'd want this too." Chidera stood up abruptly, her hands shaking as she grabbed her purse. "I need to go." "Chidera, wait," Amaka called out, but it was too late. Chidera had already stormed out of the restaurant, her emotions swelling like a storm inside her. The days that followed were agonizing. Chidera kept replaying the conversation in her head over and over, questioning whether she had made the right decision. She loved Amaka. There was no doubt about that. But her sense of duty to her mother and her fear of the unknown kept her rooted in place. Then the day of Amaka's flight arrived. Chidera sat on her bed, staring at her phone. There were missed calls from Amaka, dozens of them. Each one brought a new wave of guilt, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Deep down, she had hoped that her silence, her reluctance to engage, would somehow convince Amaka to stay. But that hope was shattered when the final message came through. I'm boarding the flight now. I'll come back for you, Chidera. I promise. But for now, I guess our paths are different. Chidera's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. She could picture Amaka at the airport, her suitcase in hand, waiting for the moment to leave everything behind. The finality of it all hit her like a punch to the gut. Tears filled her eyes as she sat there, feeling more lost than ever. Amaka had chosen a life of freedom, a life that Chidera had longed for but was too afraid to embrace. And now, she was gone. Chidera stared at her phone, her vision blurred by tears. The silence in the room was deafening, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. She had never imagined it would end like this. Amaka leaving and her staying behind, caught between love and duty. The thoughts lingered in her mind as she wiped her eyes. Would Amaka really come back? Or would she embrace this new chapter in her life abroad, forgetting Chidera? Chidera resolved to embrace whatever came next, knowing that life, much like love, was an unpredictable journey filled with twists and turns. Chidera's mother clung tightly to her arm from her bedridden state, her voice weak but insistent. Give me grandchildren, my daughter. Let me hold just one before I die. Mwam, she pleaded, her eyes filling with a familiar intensity. Chidera looked at her mother, exasperation creeping into her voice. Mommy, stop it. You're not going to die, she replied, though a pang of fear twisted inside her. Chidera sat alone at the restaurant, her mind drifting into memories as she gazed around. It was the same restaurant that held memories of her and Amaka. The same restaurant where Amaka had once proposed and suggested they live together, that they take a chance on a future away from prying eyes. And the same restaurant where she had walked away from that proposal, shackled by the weight of her mother's illness. If only she could turn back the hands of time. It had been nearly 2 years since Amaka left, and the void she left behind seemed to grow deeper each day. For the first 6 months after Amaka's departure, they had kept in touch almost daily, their calls a lifeline. But over time, those conversations grew sparse, like sand slipping through her fingers. As life continued to pull them down separate paths, staying connected became harder. By now, their calls had dwindled to just once in a while. In fact, they hadn't spoken at all this September, and the month was already drawing to a close. A hollow ache settled in her chest. Amaka has probably made new friends by now, she thought. Maybe even found a new girlfriend. The thoughts tightened around her heart. She could almost picture Amaka wrapped in someone else's arms, rhythmically breathing on each other, holding her just like she had once held Chidera. The memory washed over her, unbidden, bringing with it an intense pang of longing and a soft flush of warmth. She reached out for the glass in front of her, taking a slow sip of wine, letting the taste linger, hoping it might dull the edges of her loneliness. Her mother, now in recovery, echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of expectations she could barely bring herself to meet. Give me grandchildren. She had no idea about Chidera'S love for Amaka or how deeply that love had run throughout the university. With a sigh, Chidera finished the wine and poured the rest of the bottle into her glass, feeling the weight of emptiness settle in once more. She was just about to lift it to her lips when someone approached her table, casting a shadow across her. Hi, beautiful angel, a masculine voice said, and before she could react, the man slid into the seat opposite her without asking. Chidera sighed inwardly, annoyance flickering across her face. Another man, another interruption. She set her glass down, already standing to leave. But the man, Uchenna, as he would introduce himself, held up a hand, his voice softening. I'm sorry if I was too forward, he said, his tone laced with sincerity. Please, I just wanted to talk. I I lost my mother yesterday and came here to be alone. I thought maybe talking to someone might help, but I understand if you'd rather not. Chidera paused, the words striking a chord within her. Just a few months ago, she had been terrified of losing her own mother. She slowly lowered herself back into her seat, her expression softening. I'm so sorry for your loss, she murmured gently, her gaze meeting his with empathy. Uchenna nodded, managing a small grateful smile. Thank you. It's been a lot to process. As they began talking, the tension between them eased. Their conversation drifted from memories of family to the bittersweet realities of life. For a moment, Chidera felt a fragile sense of connection, though the shadow of her past love lingered nearby. As weeks passed, Chidera and Uchenna started spending more time together. She found comfort in his steady presence, a reliable and uncomplicated companionship. In moments of quiet, she realized she was beginning to understand what Amaka might have seen in Mr. Ike back then, a safe platonic connection. But there was a crucial difference. Uchenna wasn't content with just friendship. He wanted something deeper, something real. Chidera sat in her room one evening, staring down at her phone, her thumb hovering over Amaka's contacts. Days had passed since they last spoke, and each attempt to spark up a conversation seemed to fall flat. Amaka's replies felt distant, her responses short, distracted. Chidera could feel the growing distance between them, like a weight in her chest, suffocating and inescapable. Unable to hold it in any longer, she typed a message, her fingers trembling slightly as she hit send. I know you found someone new. The message was marked as read almost instantly, but the reply never came. She stared at the screen, her heart sinking as the read receipt lingered, a silent rejection. The hurt washed over her like a tidal wave. She wanted to cry, to let the ache spill out, but she'd promised herself no more tears over Amaka. With a resigned sigh, she whispered to herself, it's over between me and Amaka. In the days that followed, she let herself be swept into Uchenna's world, agreeing to his gentle request to make things official between them. But even as she accepted his affection, a gnawing emptiness remained, an unfillable void left by Amaka. She tried to ignore it, even attempted to find that connection elsewhere, joining online lesbian communities, meeting new people, hoping she might find someone who could ease the ache Amaka left behind. But all her efforts felt shallow, lacking the depth she craved. Chidera was careful to keep her future self hidden from Uchenna, masking her hesitations with careful excuses. Kissing him was the hardest part. Each time he leaned in, she found herself pulling back, inventing reasons to avoid it. After a month of subtle evasion, Uchenna finally sat her down, a gentle smile on his face, but worry in his eyes. Do I have bad breath or something? He asked, a hint of humor in his tone, though she could see he was genuinely concerned. Chidera chuckled softly, trying to hide her discomfort. No, Uche, it's nothing like that. Then what is it? He pressed, his voice soft. You're allowed to be honest with me, you know. She forced a smile, struggling to find the right words. I just, I just don't really like kissing, that's all. Uchenna nodded, his expression thoughtful as he squeezed her hand reassuringly. That's okay. I can be patient. But patience wasn't the answer to what weighed on her heart. Inside, she wanted to scream out to Amaka, to beg her to come back, to save her from this life she was trying so hard to fit into. Yet every attempt to reach Amaka ended in silence, and her heartache only deepened. One day, while heading home from her new job at a publishing firm, Chidera saw a familiar face alighting from a bus. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Susan, the girl who'd been far too close to Amaka during their time in the university, a rivalry that had kept Chidera uneasy for months. Susan noticed her too, her eyes lighting up in recognition. She walked over with a bright smile, and before Chidera could decide how to react, Susan wrapped her in an unexpected hug. Longest time, Chidera, Susan beamed as they pulled back, studying Chidera with a knowing look. Yeah, it's been a while, Chidera replied, forcing a polite smile. They exchanged numbers, though Chidera felt a twinge of reluctance. Despite her reservations, she found herself agreeing when Susan later invited her out for drinks. A few evenings later, they sat in a dimly lit bar, the air thick with unspoken words. So, Susan began, taking a sip of her drink. How's life been since school? You seeing anyone? She raised her eyebrows, her tone casual, but her eyes probing. Chidera hesitated, feeling her cheeks flush. Uh, I'm seeing someone, yes. Susan gave her a knowing smile, leaning in slightly. Still into, you know, she hinted, her voice low as if discussing a secret. Chidera felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she forced herself to respond. Some things haven't changed. Susan nodded, her gaze growing more distant as she swirled her glass thoughtfully. And Amaka, how's she doing? I heard she left the country. Lucky her. If I got that chance, I'd leave this place too, she said, sighing wistfully. Chidera's polite smile began to fade, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She shifted in her seat, glancing at her watch. I think I should get going. I'm already late for. Susan caught the hesitation in her voice, raising a hand. No need to make up an excuse, Chidera, she said, sighing. I get it. There was a bit of silence before Susan's gaze softened. Look, I always knew how much you two loved each other. I mean, even when Amaka and I were close, it was obvious she still had a thing for you. Chidera's heart stopped, her voice catching in her throat. Close? What? What do you mean by that? Susan shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. Oh my god, she didn't tell you, did she? She looked away, biting her lip, regret washing over her face. I I thought you knew. I'm sorry, Chidera. I didn't mean to bring it up. You two were intimate. Chidera's voice cracked, a blend of shock and disbelief flooding her tone. Susan frowned, her eyes widening. Chidera, I I thought you knew. It was just it was just one night after a party. She she told me it was a mistake. but the words barely registered. Chidera'S world began to spin, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she fought back the sting of tears. Without another word, she rose from her seat, nearly knocking her drink over in her haste. Susan called after her, but the words fell away as Chidera stumbled out of the bar, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She could barely see through the blur of tears as she walked aimlessly down the street, her chest tight with betrayal. Amaka, how could you? You lied to me. Her heart cried out, the ache consuming her with every step. When Chidera got back home, the anger and hurt churned within her, each thought like a fresh sting. She wanted to block Amaka's contacts and erase her from her life, but as she opened her phone, she hesitated, remembering the last time she tried to walk away without a word. No, she thought, not again. This time, she needs to know the truth. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she typed a message, her fingers trembling with a mix of pain and rage. I know what happened between you and Susan at the party. She hit send, her heart pounding as she waited. Almost immediately, Amaka saw the message and the typing indicator appeared. Chidera watched as the little dots blinked on the screen, feeling an unexpected flare of anger. Oh, so she can reply quickly now, she thought bitterly. All this time, she acted too busy to respond, but now the message came true. Nothing happened between me and Susan. I already told you that. Chidera stared at it, a dozen questions swelling in her mind. Her fingers moved to type, but she paused when she saw that Amaka was typing again. The next message came through, longer and sharper, and it hit her like a punch. I'm here killing myself every day, trying to save enough money to come back and try again after you jilted me the last time. And all you can do is sit there and come up with these silly ideas. First, you accuse me of having an affair here, and now this nonsense about Susan. What exactly is your problem, Chidera? Chidera read the message, feeling a cold dread settle over her. She could barely breathe. In all the years she'd known Amaka, she had never seen her this angry. Her words cut deep, slicing through Chidera's doubts and defensiveness until only raw vulnerability remained. She stared at her phone, her mind racing. What was she supposed to believe? Her thoughts tangled in a storm of emotions as she typed a tentative reply. I don't know what to believe, Amaka. But as her thumb hovered over the send button, uncertainty froze her. Her heart wavered, and she closed her phone screen, burying her face in her hands as sobs broke free. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted any of this. The familiar chime of new message jolted her, but she hesitated before looking, afraid of what might come next. Slowly, she opened the screen and read Amaka's latest reply. Question mark. A moment passed, and then another message appeared. Chidera, I didn't mean to be like that. Chidera clenched her jaw, her eyes filling with fresh tears as she let her phone fall beside her, curling up on her bed. Chidera closed her eyes as Uchenna leaned in, his lips meeting hers with a tender softness. She felt herself drifting, memories flooding her mind, carrying her back to the first time Amaka had kissed her. She could almost feel Amaka's warmth, the way she made her feel complete, as Uchenna continued, oblivious to her thoughts. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she struggled to hold them back, swallowing down her sorrow as she had an intercourse for the first time. When he finally pulled away, he smiled, looking at her with a mix of adoration and surprise. I didn't know you were still a virgin, Chidera, he whispered, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. My love for you just tripled. Chidera's heart twisted, and she felt herself pulling inward, shielding herself from the reality she was facing. She sat up slowly, feeling numb, her head spinning. Let's get married, Uchenna continued, his voice filled with conviction. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable, like she couldn't quite believe what he had just said. He moved beside her, his eyes shining as he reached into the bedside drawer. With a slight flourish, he pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a delicate ring. Dropping to one knee beside her, his gaze held hers. Chidera Chukwu, knowing you has been the best thing that has happened to me since I lost my mom. Please, he paused, his voice a soft plea. Do me the honor of being my wife. Chidera stared at the ring, a blankness settling over her. She wanted to feel something joy, gratitude, relief, but all she felt was a void. Her heart was elsewhere, bound to a past she couldn't escape. After a long silence, she forced herself to speak. I I need some time, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. Uchenna's face fell, disappointment flickering across his features. But he sat back on the bed, reaching for her hand. I'm willing to wait for you, Chidera, he said, his voice gentle. I'm patient. That night, after returning home, Chidera went straight to the bathroom, turning on the shower as hot as it would go. She stepped under the water, tears mingling with the stream as she scrubbed at her skin, trying to wash away the pain, the confusion, the feeling of emptiness. She whispered to herself, a tremble in her voice. I finally did it. I finally broke free of Amaka. But as the words left her lips, they sounded hollow. She pressed her hands against the shower tiles, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had given herself to a man, a part of her, hoping it would sever the hold Amaka had on her heart. But instead, she felt a deep sense of disgust and shame. Why did Amaka have to keep breaking my heart? Why hide things from me? Why all these secrets? She pressed her fists against her chest, her voice a broken whisper. I just want a normal life. Her anguish was interrupted by a sudden scream from down the hall. She froze, panic gripping her. Mommy! She shouted, quickly grabbing a towel and wrapping it around herself before rushing to her mother's room. Her mother was lying in bed, gasping for breath, her face pale. Chidera felt her own breath hitch, fear flooding her veins as she called out for help. Neighbors quickly gathered, helping her rush her mother to the hospital. Hours later, Chidera stood by her mother's bedside, her vision blurred by tears. The doctor had told her in gentle but firm words that her mother's condition was deteriorating. At best, he had said quietly, she has about a year left. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts, soft but filled with warmth. Chidera, my daughter, don't cry for me. I've lived my life, she murmured, reaching for Chidera's hand with a faint smile. All I ask is that you allow me to see my grandchild before I leave this world. Chidera felt a fresh wave of sorrow overwhelm her as she held her mother's frail hand, her chest tightening at the thought of her mother's dying wish. Days passed, and Chidera found herself staring at her phone, the screen casting a dull glow in the dim room. After their last heated exchange, she hadn't spoken to Amaka. It was November 28th now, and they hadn't exchanged a word since the 10th. The silence stretched painfully between them, and doubt gnawed at her heart. Had Amaka been deceiving me all along? She wondered. Was everything we had just a lie? Her chest tightened as tears welled in her eyes. She couldn't take the silence, the doubt any longer. She dialed Uchenna's number, her decision made. When they met later that evening, they sat in quiet reflection for a while. Finally, Chidera broke the silence, her voice steady but emotionless. I will marry you. Uchenna's eyes lit up, a joyful smile breaking across his face. He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and secure. You have no idea how happy that makes me, Chidera. She managed a small hollow smile, telling herself that this was the right choice. She would fulfill her mother's wish, give her a grandchild, and build a new life, one without the ghost of Amaka haunting her every step. It was the best decision, she reasoned. This would finally end her obsession with Amaka. In the days that followed, fate played its hand, and after just that one encounter with Uchenna, Chidera discovered she was pregnant. It was harmattan season again, mid-December, and the air was thick with dust, carrying a chill that seemed to seep straight into the bones. Chidera sat alone, wrapped in a cozy blanket, scrolling through a catalogue of evening wear on her phone. Her mind was only half focused, the other half drifting through her thoughts as the dry air scratched at her skin. Suddenly, her phone chimed with a new message notification. She glanced down at the screen, her heart freezing as she read the sender's name, Amaka. Chidera, the message read. Guess what? Chidera's eyes widened, her heart pounding as she stared at the screen, almost afraid to reply. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she'd last heard from Amaka, and the silence had felt like a slow, agonizing stretch of uncertainty. Now, out of nowhere, Amaka was back. Before she could even respond, another message appeared. I just got back to the country. I'm in a taxi on my way to my house. I know, I wanted it to be a surprise. I've missed you so much, Chidera. Let's meet at the restaurant tonight at 8 p.m. Chidera's heart dropped. She wasn't expecting this at all. She sat frozen, staring at the screen as a flood of emotions washed over her. Joy, confusion, fear. Amaka actually came back for me. But as her initial shock faded, reality set in like a cold hard slap. However, will I explain all of this to her? She thought, a hand instinctively moving to her stomach. She wasn't the same woman Amaka had left 2 years ago. She was pregnant now, engaged to another person. Amaka had no idea about the whirlwind of changes that had unfolded in her absence. Her phone buzzed again. Amaka was calling. Chidera hesitated, staring at the ringing phone in her hand. A dozen thoughts raced through her mind, each one a blend of hope and dread. Finally, she took a shaky breath and answered. Chidera! Amaka's voice was warm, bright, and brimming with excitement. Just hearing it sent a pang of longing through Chidera's chest. I bet you are surprised, huh? I've been planning this for ages. I couldn't bear it any longer. I had to come back. I've missed you so much. I can't wait to see you. Chidera tried to summon a smile, but it felt forced. Amaka, I I don't know what to say. I wasn't expecting this. Amaka laughed on the other end, the sound so familiar and comforting that it almost made Chidera forget, for a brief moment, the complications that lay ahead. I know, I wanted to surprise you, she said, her voice softening. I just kept picturing your face when I showed up. Tonight at the restaurant. I can't wait. Chidera felt a pang of guilt tighten in her chest. She forced herself to respond, keeping her voice steady. I, I'll be there. Great, Amaka's voice was palpable, almost infectious. It's like old times, right? Just you and me. I'll see you soon, Chidera. As the call ended, Chidera stared blankly at the screen, her mind spinning. She was torn between a flood of emotions. How could she go tonight? How could she possibly explain this to Amaka? She could already picture the look of shock, the pain, the questions that would inevitably follow. Chidera whispered to herself, voice heavy with dread. This isn't going to end well. Uchenna seemed like a very decent man, and Chidera felt a deep sadness. knowing she could never love him the way he deserved. He was so open-minded that sometimes she found herself almost confessing her true self to him, her orientation, her preferences, all the parts of her he could never know. Just the other day, he was laughing, telling her about how he suspected one of his colleagues was gay. I can always sniff them from a mile away, he had chuckled, glancing at her with a sly smile. If only he knew. But seriously, he continued, the laughter fading from his eyes as he looked at her. I don't have anything against them. Love is love, regardless of gender. It's just a shame that our society won't let people express themselves freely. Don't you think? Chidera nodded cautiously, feeling her heart twist as she listened. Like this guy at work, he was giving me these subtle looks, you know. Uchenna leaned in, his eyes gleaming mischievously, like he was trying to see if I'll be interested in things like that. Chidera held her breath, watching him carefully. But nah, he laughed, breaking the tension as he shook his head. I can't give up a lady's touch. That's a pleasure I'm not willing to sacrifice. He smirked and looked at her, his eyes playful, stopping short of finishing his thoughts since she clearly understood. Chidera forced a laugh, yet felt a pang of guilt so sharp she had to look away. That morning, Amaka's message had arrived, saying she'd landed back in the country. Chidera'S heart had skipped a beat, excitement surging, but just as quickly, fear sank in. How would she meet Amaka now? How would she explain everything? The engagement, the pregnancy. Standing in front of her mirror, she stared at her reflection, pressing her hand to her stomach. She was only about 2 months along, but in her mind, it was like she could already see the bump growing, her secret threatening to show itself. She will figure it out in a glance, she muttered, smoothing down her dress. She chose a baggy one, hoping to hide it. But for how long? Chidera arrived at the restaurant a few minutes past 8 p.m., her nerves tightening with each step. She spotted Amaka right away, sitting at a corner table, her back to the entrance. The sight of her sent Chidera'S heart racing. Amaka was still the same, beautiful, stunning, gorgeous. She moved closer, and as Amaka turned, their eyes met. The sweet, familiar scent of Amaka's perfume filled Chidera'S senses, bringing back a flood of memories, making her long for the warmth of Amaka's touch. Amaka stood up, her face lighting up with a smile. Before Chidera could speak, Amaka pulled her into a tight hug. Chidera closed her eyes, melting into the embrace, letting herself get lost in the familiarity of Amaka's arms. Her heart beat close enough to feel. Amaka's stomach pressed slightly against her own, making Chidera tense for just a second before she relaxed. Chidera, Amaka whispered, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. I never thought this day would come again. She pulled back just enough to look into Chidera'S eyes. How foolish I was to have left. Chidera managed a small smile, though her heart was thudding painfully. I missed you too, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat down, the flickering candlelight between them, casting soft shadows across their faces as they began to eat. Amaka picked at her food, glancing at Chidera with a small, hesitant smile. "How's everything been?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "I hope your mother is doing better." Chidera swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile back. It's it's been okay, she replied, nodding. "My mother's getting better." But no matter how hard she tried to mask it, Chidera knew Amaka could sense something was off. Amaka set down her cutlery, studying Chidera intently, her expression softening with concern. "You are not happy," Amaka said gently, reaching for her glass of wine. She took a small sip, watching Chidera over the rim. "Look, I know you always need me to reassure you. So this is it." She set her glass down, her voice growing earnest. "I didn't touch any other woman or even any man while I was away. Yes, there were temptations. Yes, there were days I wanted so badly to, you know." She trailed off, a playful glint in her eye. "But I didn't." Chidera felt her heart ache as she listened, her grip tightening around her own glass. "I love you, Chidera," Amaka continued softly, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I always have, and I always will." Chidera's gaze fell, and she took a long sip from her wine glass. The words hung in the air, filling her with a painful longing. "And Susan?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Amaka's face softened, a hint of sadness flickering in her eyes. "I'm telling you the truth, Chidera," she said, reaching across the table as if to reassure her. But Chidera shook her head, her heart pounding. "Then why would Susan lie?" Chidera asked, her voice breaking slightly. "She said that you two were at a party and—" Amaka's expression darkened, her hand going still as she downed the rest of her wine in one quick gulp. She looked away, her jaw tightening. "Is that what she said?" she murmured almost to herself. Chidera leaned forward, desperation edging her voice. "Just tell me the truth, Amaka. I need to hear it from you." Amaka sighed, looking down at her empty glass before finally meeting Chidera's gaze. She exhaled slowly, a hint of resignation in her eyes. "What happened at that party was a mistake." Chidera's heart pounded as Amaka began to explain, dread swelling in her stomach. So, Amaka had been hiding something after all. "We'd had too much to drink," Amaka continued, her voice tinged with regret. "We talked about life and how hard it is to stay in the closet. I told her I couldn't get you out of my mind." She paused, searching Chidera'S face. "She said she had a remedy. And then she kissed me." Amaka hesitated, watching Chidera'S reaction carefully. But Chidera'S face was unreadable, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I I kissed her back," Amaka admitted, her voice barely audible. "But when we got back to my place, I couldn't go through with it. Nothing happened, Chidera. I stopped it." Chidera's eyes filled with tears as she stared at Amaka, her voice trembling. "And you are just finally telling me this now?" Amaka reached out to take her hand, but Chidera pulled back, the pain evident on her face. "It's not a big deal, Chidera," Amaka said softly, her tone almost pleading. I didn't think much of it. Nothing happened. It wasn't worth remembering. Besides, we were broken up. We were both single. Chidera nodded slowly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she replied, "Well, thank you for finally being honest with me, Amaka." She took a deep breath, her emotions swelling uncontrollably. She looked at Amaka, her eyes hardening. "You should know that while you were away, things changed a lot for me." Amaka's brow furrowed as she searched Chidera'S face. "What do you mean?" Chidera held her gaze, her voice steady but filled with anguish. "I'm engaged to be married in 2 weeks." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And I'm pregnant." That night, Chidera'S world seemed to unravel. She barely made it through the door before a wave of emotion overtook her, and she collapsed to the floor, clutching her stomach as sobs racked her body. Her vision blurred as she looked around the room, filled with remnants of her carefully built life, now feeling like a cage closing in. Blindly, she reached for anything within arm's length, throwing books, her phone charger, a framed picture, all scattering across the floor. The pain was too much, twisting and coiling inside her like a vice squeezing her heart. And then her phone started buzzing. Uchenna. The glow of his name on her screen only intensified the ache. She couldn't face him. Not tonight. How could she, when the image of Amaka's face, that look of betrayal in her eyes, was burned into her mind? Amaka, who had looked at her as if she'd become a stranger, as if she had shattered something pure and irreplaceable between them. Back in the restaurant, after Chidera had spoken the words she dreaded, she had watched as Amaka's face drained of color. Her jaw had tightened, and her hands had gone limp, dropping her napkin to the floor. Amaka's eyes, usually bright with confidence and warmth, had gone cold and distant, as if Chidera were suddenly a ghost in front of her. "Amaka," Chidera had whispered, reaching out instinctively. But Amaka had shaken her head, her face twisted in pain, barely able to look at her. Without another word, she had pushed back her chair and stood up abruptly, her body trembling. For a brief second, Chidera thought Amaka would say something, anything, to break the silence between them. But instead, Amaka had turned, her footsteps echoing sharply as she rushed out of the restaurant, her shoulders rigid with heartbreak. "Amaka," Chidera had called after her, her voice cracking, but Amaka didn't turn back. The door swung shut behind her, leaving Chidera alone, staring at the empty seat and the unfinished meal, feeling the full weight of what she had lost. Back home, the memories replayed over and over in her mind. She barely registered Uchenna's name, flashing on her phone screen before it fell from her hand to the floor. His persistence was like a dull throb in the back of her mind, but she couldn't face him, not tonight. Finally, with a surge of anger and grief, she grabbed the phone, powered it off, and buried her face in her hands, sobbing until her chest ached. The next morning, a knock on the door jolted her from the fog of exhaustion. She hadn't slept, her eyes swollen and bloodshot, her head pounding from the endless stream of tears. She forced herself up, each step toward the door heavy with dread. When she opened it, Uchenna stood there, concern etched deeply into his face. His brows knitted together as he took in her appearance, her swollen eyes, her rumpled clothes, her fragile demeanor. Chidera, he said softly, stepping inside. I was calling you all night. Are you okay? Chidera opened her mouth to answer, but her voice caught. She looked away, her throat tight, unwilling to meet his gaze. Uchenna placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with worry. Is it? Is mommy okay? His tone softened as he searched her eyes. His tone softened as he searched her eyes. She managed a nod, swallowing hard. She's fine, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. He followed her into the living room. She felt the weight of his concern, genuine and unrelenting, as he sat down, motioning for her to join him. She hesitated, then slumped onto the couch. What's the matter, Chidera? He asked quietly, leaning forward, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes held nothing but compassion, a warmth she felt unworthy of. She took a deep breath, her voice cracking slightly as she finally spoke. I I met an old friend yesterday. It had been years since we'd seen each other. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. And we argued. Uchena's brows furrowed as he studied her, clearly perplexed at the depth of her sadness over a disagreement. An old friend? He echoed, trying to understand. But why are you so upset? Chidera looked away, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. He couldn't possibly understand, and the truth hovered on the tip of her tongue, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. But instead, she swallowed it down. It's just, we were close, very close, she said, her voice wavering. And I guess seeing her again, realizing how much has changed, it hurt. Uchenna moved closer, reaching out and gently holding her hands. Chidera, people grow apart sometimes. Even people who were once very close. Life has a way of changing things, even when we don't want it to. He gave her hands a comforting squeeze. Look, before we lost my mom, Ruth, my sister, and I were inseparable. But after, everything changed. We are still family, but we hardly talk now. It's painful, but it's part of life. Sometimes you have to let people go. And if they are meant to come back, they will. The universe will find a way. Chidera'S lips trembled as a hint of smile crossed her face, bittersweet and fleeting. He was so right, so accurate in his words, yet completely unaware of the true depth of her pain. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked away, trying to hide the tears that had begun to gather again. But Uchenna saw them and gently brushed his thumb across her knuckles. You are stronger than you think, Chidera. And whatever it is that is hurting you this much, it will pass. Just give it time. She nodded, biting back the words she wanted to say, the truth she wanted to spill. The sound of wedding bells filled the air, reverberating from the church where guests were gathered for the much anticipated union of Chidera and Uchenna. Chidenna 2021 read the white banners draped along the pews, signaling the start of a new chapter in her life. Inside her house, Chidera sat silently as the makeup artist worked, carefully applying foundation, brushing her cheeks, and lining her eyes. She stared into the mirror, barely registering her own reflection. Her mind was swirling. Outside, the loud hum of a lawnmower cut through the air, disturbing the otherwise peaceful morning. Chidera turned, frowning. She had asked the gardener to take the hint and return later in the week. But here he was, relentlessly trimming the grass at the front porch. The makeup artist paused, glancing at her through the mirror. Are you okay, Chidera? You look a little distracted. Chidera blinked and forced a smile. Yes, yes, I'm fine. Just a little nervous. Well, that's normal, the artist replied with a warm smile. It's your big day. Every bride feels that way. She resumed her work, delicately brushing blush onto Chidera's cheeks. Chidera stood by the mirror, smoothing out her wedding dress. The fabric hugged her figure, and though the small baby bump was still invisible, she could feel it, her little secret nestled beneath the satin. This is my reality now, she whispered, barely audible. Her eyes lingered on her reflection. I'll make my mother a proud grandmother. Live a normal life, socially acceptable life. I'm a woman now. That was my past. I'm about to be a mother, and I have to make hard choices. She reached for her phone and began scrolling through old photos, her finger pausing over one in particular, a picture of her and Amaka from their university days, laughing, arms wrapped around each other, their eyes filled with that carefree light only youth and hidden love could bring. Her mind drifted back to those days, to the moments they'd stolen from the world, the quiet smiles, Amaka's fierce protectiveness, and the feeling of her hands. She remembered their first kiss, the way Amaka had looked at her, intense and unapologetic, the way she'd never felt with anyone else. Her breath caught, and she bit her lip, pushing the thoughts away. That was my past. The loud whirring of the mower broke her reverie again. She glanced at the time, an hour until the ceremony. But brides were allowed a little lateness on their wedding day. Besides, her bridesmaids were still scattered in different rooms, fussing over their hair and makeup. Chidera sighed and walked over to the window, ready to call out again. She leaned out, her voice carrying a hint of irritation. For the love of God, don't you speak English? I asked you to come back later in the week. But this time, the noise stopped abruptly. Chidera blinked, surprised, and then her breath hitched. Standing by the lawn, dressed in a white wedding gown, was Amaka. Her heart stilled, the world falling silent around her as she took in the sight. Amaka was beautiful, her dress flowing like silk, her hair pulled back just enough to reveal the strength in her face. She stood motionless, staring back at Chidera with a look so intense it was as if nothing else existed. a piercing gaze that seemed to strip away the years of separation and silence between them. Chidera'S heart fluttered wildly as she ran down the stairs, her mind a whirlwind. She opened the front door, stepping out into the warm morning light, her wedding dress brushing against the ground. Her breath was shallow, her heart racing with every step as she closed the distance between them. She stopped, mere inches away, looking Amaka up and down, lost in her presence. "What are you doing here?" Chidera'S voice was barely above a whisper, her tone filled with an urgency she could no longer hide. Her gaze lingered on Amaka, taking in every detail. The way the morning light touched her, casting soft shadows on her skin. Amaka didn't answer. She looked at Chidera, her expression unreadable. Then a smirk tugged at the corners of her mouth. "And why are you dressed like that?" Chidera asked softly, her voice filled with disbelief. Amaka's gaze softened as she stepped closer, the air thickening between them. She lifted a hand, brushing a stray lock of hair from Chidera'S cheek, her fingers lingering just a little too long. "Was he better than me?" Amaka whispered, her voice laced with a hint of mischief. Her eyes searched Chidera'S, their faces so close now that she could feel the warmth of Amaka's breath. Chidera'S resolve began to crumble. She felt her cheeks flush as she looked away, her heart racing. "Amaka, stop. Does he understand the chemistry of your body better than I do?" Amaka's lips brushed her ear as she spoke, her voice sending chills down Chidera'S spine. Before Chidera could respond, Amaka's lips captured hers, soft and urgent. All of Chidera'S defenses melted away as she surrendered, her hands reaching up to grip Amaka's shoulders, pulling her closer. The world around them vanished, the weight of her decision, her wedding, all dissolving in that kiss. Gasping, they broke apart for a second, Amaka's eyes dark with emotion, her hands resting on Chidera'S waist. Without a word, Chidera led Amaka toward the back of the house, their steps hurried, fueled by an unspoken need. They found a secluded spot, hidden from the world, and fell into each other's arms, letting their passion consume them like never before. As Chidera and Amaka laid entwined on the ground, basking in the afterglow of their stolen moment, Amaka looked over and gently brushed her fingers across Chidera'S cheek. Her eyes sparkled with a soft but fierce determination. "Are you okay?" Amaka asked, her voice filled with a tenderness that only seemed to deepen the ache in Chidera'S heart. Chidera smiled, nodding. "Yes," she replied, starting to pull herself up when Amaka's hand slipped around her arm, stopping her. "Chidera," Amaka's voice trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady, burning with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. "I can't live without you. I tried to erase you from my mind after I learned everything, but I just couldn't." She paused, swallowing, her fingers tightening around Chidera'S arm. "Let's elope together." Her voice grew softer, almost a whisper. Chidera sighed deeply, her heart caught between the loyalty that had held her for so long and the love that was urging her to leap into the unknown. She reached out, cupping Amaka's face, her eyes searching Amaka's, trying to memorize every line. every emotion flickering there. I love you, Amaka, she whispered, her voice a mixture of resignation and hope. Amaka's eyes softened as she leaned in, their lips meeting in a slow, lingering kiss that felt like a promise. Meanwhile, at the church, Uchenna stood near the altar, glancing at the door and checking his watch. Guests were already murmuring, waiting for the bride to arrive. Just then, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from Chidera. The moment he read the words, his world seemed to shatter around him. I can't go through with this. I'm sorry. My heart belongs somewhere else. His hands began to tremble as he stared at the message, his mind racing. The words blurred as he read them again and again, disbelief settling in. Uchenna barely noticed his brother's concerned hand on his shoulder as he stumbled out of the church, feeling as though he were in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. Back at the hospital, Chidera walked slowly down the hallway, her heart pounding. She'd come to see her mother, to tell her the truth once and for all. It was time. Amaka was right. They couldn't hide forever. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped into the hospital room and found her mother lying quietly, her face softened with illness. "Mommy," Chidera began, her voice cracking. She forced herself to stay calm, but tears filled her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you." Her mother's eyes opened slowly, her gaze settling on Chidera with concern. "What is it, my dear?" Chidera swallowed, fighting through the knot in her throat. I'm I'm a lesbian, mommy." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the words echoed in the small room. "I love Amaka. I can't marry Uchenna. I can't live a life that isn't mine." Her mother's face went pale, her lips parting in shock. Chidera watched as confusion turned to disbelief, her mother's eyes searching hers as if looking for a sign that this was some kind of cruel joke. "After all these years," her mother's voice trailed off, trembling. I thought you'd moved on, Chidera, that you wanted to settle down." Chidera's heart ached as her mother's breaths grew shallow, the monitor beeping faster in response. Panic surged through her, and she reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Mommy, please calm down. I didn't mean to upset you." But her mother's eyes glazed over, her chest heaving as the monitor's beeping intensified, the sound filling the room. Chidera stumbled back, her heart racing with fear. She dashed out into the hallway, calling desperately for a doctor. Moments later, a nurse and a doctor rushed into the room, but it was too late. The doctor turned to Chidera, his expression heavy. "I'm sorry. She's gone." Chidera's knees gave way, and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Amaka arrived moments later, wrapping her arms around her as Chidera's cries echoed down the empty hallway. "She wanted to see one grandchild from me," Chidera whispered between sobs. "She ended up seeing none." Amaka held her tightly, murmuring words of comfort, but nothing could ease the guilt and sorrow that filled Chidera's heart. They held each other so close that when Uchenna walked in, he could easily piece what was happening. The funeral was a quiet affair. Chidera stood by her mother's graveside, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with red. Amaka stayed by her side, her presence a steady comfort as she held Chidera'S hand, offering silent support. As the last of the guests left, Chidera felt a looming shadow over her shoulder. She turned slowly and saw Uchenna approaching, his face set in a grim line. She could see the pain in his eyes, the heartbreak that went far beyond words. Uchenna, she murmured, her voice filled with regret. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, a storm of emotions simmering beneath the surface. So it was her all this time. His voice was low, laced with bitterness. Chidera nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. I'm sorry, Uchenna. I never meant to hurt you. I just... I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Uchenna shook his head, exhaling a shaky breath. You didn't just hurt me, Chidera. You broke me. So what now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What happens to the baby on the way? Chidera hesitated, her mind racing. She glanced over at Amaka, who stood nearby, her expression steady but worried. Chidera turned back to Uchenna, swallowing as she searched for an answer. We could co-parent, she suggested, her words uncertain, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Uchenna scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips as he shook his head. Co-parent, he repeated, the disbelief evident in his voice. His eyes flashed with resentment. Too bad we didn't go through with the wedding, he muttered, his tone laced with bitterness. At least then, I would have had a fighting chance in court. I would have fought for sole custody of that child. The words hit Chidera like a punch to the gut. She took a step back, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Her heart raced as the gravity of his words sank in. He was willing to take her baby away, to cut her out of the child's life. Uchenna's face twisted with anguish as he looked away, struggling to regain his composure. He turned on his heel, striding away without another word, leaving Chidera standing there, a hollow ache spreading through her chest. Amaka moved closer, her hand finding Chidera's arm, steadying her. Chidera, she murmured softly, her tone gentle but urgent. We need to leave soon. He's not going to make this easy for you. Once that baby is born, he's going to do everything he can to take it. Chidera closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek as she leaned into Amaka's comforting presence. But this is my home, she whispered, her voice breaking. Amaka tightened her grip, tilting Chidera's face up to look into her eyes. I know, love, but we can build new memories, a new life together, somewhere we won't have to hide who we are. I know someone who can get the passport ready in a few hours. We can leave tomorrow. Chidera's shoulders shook as she let out a soft sob, the fear and uncertainty overwhelming her. She buried her face against Amaka's shoulder, clutching her tightly. I never wanted things to end this way. I wanted peace, a normal life. Amaka stroked her back soothingly. I know, Chidera, I know. But sometimes we have to fight for our happiness, even if it means leaving everything else behind. You and I, we deserve that chance. Chidera nodded slowly, her tears soaking into Amaka's shoulder as she held onto her. finding comfort in the warmth and strength that Amaka offered. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could love freely, without fear, without shame. As they held each other, Chidera whispered, I'm scared, Amaka, but if I'm with you, I think I can do this. Amaka pulled back, giving her a small, encouraging smile. You are stronger than you think, Chidera. We'll make it together. Amaka, I was going through my mother's box and I found some letters. Amaka, do you know my mother was once a lesbian?